Addiction. What is it? Why does it happen? How does one objectively look at addiction from an outside perspective? Can we make sense of it, even if we can't relate? It can be tempting to simplify addiction into a black and white issue. In reality, it's really more of a spectrum of decisions and factors that only become more blurred over time. Addiction is difficult to understand, but with some context, it's more relatable than you think. We can all have a better comprehension by looking at why and how an addiction occurs rather than considering it a substance issue. Contrary to popular belief, there is no substance so addictive that it will hook any user immediately, and there is no person so predisposed that they will inevitably become an addict. Addiction, while complicated, is approachable. It all begins with asking the right questions. We'll start with why someone becomes addicted and explore the factors and predispositions in this complex disease. Addiction is a disease, like diabetes, cancer, or obesity, in the way that it develops later in life and is caused by these factors: biology, environment, and behavior. Previous discussions argued which of these risk factors was the cause of addiction. Over time, researchers realized any one of these factors could be the cause of addiction. Genetics, physiology, or gender could affect your use and desire of a substance. Family involvement, home life, school, or peers may influence your perception, encouraging the likelihood of trying or performing a behavior. Mental illness, internal behaviors, and social groups can convince someone to engage and continuously use. You could argue any one of these factors could be the cause of addiction, but realistically, these factors operate together, influencing and contributing to one another. The cause of addiction is persuaded by a network of risk factors. In order to objectively approach addiction, we must consider the entire network of the individual. Let's take this out of context for a minute. Think of the diseases mentioned, cancer, diabetes, and obesity, and how they can relate to this network. Some biological influences, definitely some environmental and internal behaviors, but beyond diseases, this network can account for much more than addiction. We can ask, why does someone develop an eating disorder? Or what makes someone susceptible to joining a toxic cult? Why does someone commit hate crimes, and where does the intolerance stem from? Why do people feel internal pain with suicidal thoughts? Or why do people inflict pain and abuse others? We can even ask simple things like, why would someone vote for Donald Trump? Behavior is explainable, although complicated. Each individual has a network, and each addict needs to be considered as an individual. The why is a winding, tangled, knotted mess, but it is the first and most important part of understanding addiction. The why can be complicated, the how not so much. Let's talk about how one becomes addicted to a substance. Addiction is considered a brain disease, not only because of the later development, but also because it changes the brain structure and chemical reactions. In your brain, there are tons of nerve cells, or neurons. Chemicals that pass between neurons are called neurotransmitters. This is how our brain sends messages to the neurons to conduct our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The specific neurotransmitter that's important here is dopamine. Dopamine is a feeling of pleasure within the brain. It is released when we do something good for ourselves, so our brain can remember that activity and know to do it again. This is the reason we enjoy life's natural pleasures, but also the reason we really like drugs. All major drugs increase dopamine levels and floods the brain with a powerful rush of dopamine pleasure. This causes the brain to readjust its internal supply of dopamine in order to maintain normal functioning. It becomes dependent on the drug, while also modifying the reward center to prefer the drug over natural supplies of dopamine. The progression of abuse results in permanent changes to the prefrontal cortex. This is why addiction is considered a relapsing disease. A recovering addict has an altered brain structure, even after years of being clean. Additionally, brain imaging studies from addicts show measurable changes in areas critical for learning, decision-making, and internal behaviors such as aggression, impulsivity, and poor judgment. Scientists believe these physical adaptations do indeed contribute to compulsive, harmful, or destructive behavior in addicts. The same effect can happen even without chemical drugs altering the brain. When an individual engages in an activity that increases dopamine levels, they too can become addicted to the behavior that aids that rush. These are called behavioral addictions and fall under the same symptoms of drug or alcohol addiction. What's important to take away from addiction as a brain disease is that addiction is a completely natural occurrence. We invest in artificial triggers of dopamine all the time because it makes us feel good. As a result of this, we like and partake in many things we shouldn't. we all have addictions, and all addictions encourage repeated use or behavior. Finally, we must consider how the lasting effects on the brain repeatedly encourages the use or relapse. Can someone who is addicted stop using? The progression of abuse reinforces addiction, even before someone realizes they may be an addict. Addiction is difficult to understand, so no doubt it can be difficult to diagnose. Addiction is rather characterized by compulsive seeking and excessive use, despite potentially harmful consequences. The line between abuse and addiction is often unnoticed, or dismissed even if the brain structure has already been modified and the user is an addict. While the initial decision to engage in a substance or behavior may be voluntary, repeated use leads to prolonged effects on the brain. This challenges a person's self-control and their ability to resist urges and triggers of the addiction. Can someone stop using? Certainly, but it's for the addict to decide. You can claim addiction as a choice, but you can't forget the network of factors that surrounds the individual. This destructive, though humanistic behavior is natural and explainable. We can empathize with addicts. We can ask the right questions, and we may just find the treatment lies with attempted understanding, rather than stigma and isolation. This is a difficult topic, but such a necessary one. Remember, we all have addictions, and all addictions encourage repeated use. Rather than thinking of addiction as a substance or legal issue, maybe we take a step back and look at addicts for what they are: humans, caught in an unescapable web of factors. Escaping addiction is a truly daunting task. It's a lot easier if you're not alone.